doing is just basically practicing the drill they already know. So you can see they have rifles with them. They use the Sniper Enfield rifle. So they're basically going to be marching around, sort of practicing the drill and that sort of thing. In about 3 minutes, I believe, we actually have a recruit squad. So unlike these guys who already know what they're doing, our recruit squad, these guys right here, exactly, this is actually their second day on parade. So they actually, of course, they're literally learning, how to march, how to stand like a soldier, how to do turns and that sort of thing. Basically everything is new to them.
Now they didn't have women.
They wouldn't have, no. They would have actually had soldiers' wives. I don't see any right now. Actually, there's one over in Halifax. She just went into the barrack room there. Soldiers would have had their wives. The drummers would have very, very young boys. But normally in the actual military, you wouldn't have had women. It wasn't really just nowadays, though, of course, equal opportunity and all that.
What are the names? Are you really
So welcome to the ditch. This is one of the main lines of defense for this fort and runs all the way along the walls. One of the most common questions we get about this area is, why isn't there any water in this boat? Does anyone want to guess why it's so dry down here? Why? Well, it's actually quite simple. It's because this isn't a boat. Just a ditch. The idea with the water-filled moats comes from the medieval time period when you had the knights in their heavy suits of armor. You're wearing one of those and you fall in some water, you'll sink like a rock and drown. So by this point we had the black powder muskets and rifles, so they'd stopped wearing that heavy suits of armor. And you're not wearing all that weight and you fall in some water, you get a bit wet, but you can still swim to the other side and climb out. So it's not the best defense anymore. However, with a nice big ditch like this, it's actually dug down right into the side of the hill. So if you're standing at the bottom looking up, you can't see that there's a ditch here until you're right on top of it. And if you're running up this hill and you suddenly see there's a ditch right in front of you, but there's 100 of your friends right behind you who don't know there's a ditch here, so they're running forward. It's a little hard to stop suddenly. And then you'll fall down here and break your legs. It's a little hard to take over a ford when you can't get up and walk. We also do have a couple other things in case enemies manage to get this far, if they're maybe using ropes and ladders to climb down or digging a tunnel into the side. See along this outside wall behind me there's a whole bunch of narrow little slots in there. Well, there's actually a tunnel running all the way along the outside wall. If the enemy force ever managed to get up to where we are now, there'd be a rifle sticking out of every one of those narrow little windows there. You can see we're pretty out in the open here, nice and exposed without much to hide behind. So if you ever did get this far, you'd still be in quite a bit of trouble if you're trying to climb up these walls. Are there any questions so far before we head down this way, and I can point out a few other things about around the ditch?
By the right. Hey! Mark! Nice field. Wait, mark, man.
Over here on this main building, far end here, we do have a barracks room set up. Would have lived. We also have some pieces of uniform there that you can try on and get some nice embarrassing pictures of your friends and relatives in there. Go right over here.
This gentleman is the drummer. That drum piece he's played with the hourly call. That basically signifies the beginning of the sentry change. So in charge of the sentry change here is one of the corporals of the guard who's standing out in the sun on the bridge there. And then the new sentries. So the guy who's going to be standing out there for the next hour is the gentleman in the tunnel back to us. So the principles behind a sentry change is relatively straightforward. What you're doing is you're bringing a new sentry out to replace the old sentry that's been standing out there for the past hour. And the guy standing way out there in the back to us has been standing out there for an entire hour. He hasn't been moving much. So he's probably getting a little tired. I bet you his feet are sore and he's probably bored stiff out of his mind right now. So this is certainly his favorite time of the day when he gets to come off. Yeah, well basically it's just a backpack. It looks a little different than modern ones. But as far as, you know, its function and the way it works, it's pretty much the same. That's actually where the soldiers would have carried all of their belongings when they were on campaign. Because the 78th were a regiment of foot, so basically that means they marched everywhere they went. They didn't have any, you know, horses or wagons for transport. So your average enlisted man would actually be expected to carry all of his belongings in that tiny little backpack, which is, you know, quite significant because there was also a lot of regulation kits that had to be carried in there. These guys are wearing, you know, their full marching dress. So anything they wouldn't be wearing, for example, their undress jacket like this would have to go in the backpack. Their extra fatigue shirt, their extra pair of socks, the Glengarry if they were wearing a feather bonnet, all this sort of thing would have to go in that backpack. So you couldn't really own much and carry much in our time period. So back to the sentry change. So the two sentries have now switched. The two sentries actually talk to each other for a little bit. And basically what they did, the old sentry told the new sentry exactly what his duties are, what he's supposed to do. Every sentry post is a little bit different. So to communicate sort of all the different functions and things you might have to do, the orders have to be passed down from one sentry to the next. It's very easy to communicate orders, especially in a time period when a lot of soldiers weren't able to read very well. So now the two sentries standing up there is going to be out there for the next hour. But the Corps of the Guard still has one more thing to do, which is just dismiss this gentleman into the guard. Obviously, since sentry's pretty strenuous, you can't stand straight all day. So what we do is you stand for an hour, and then you get a 2-hour break in the guard room here. So you just do this in shift works. That's what we do today, since the fort's only open. Historically, though, they actually would have stood for 24-hour periods. So the way you work this is you actually stand sentry for 2 hours, and then you actually get a 4-hour break in the guard room right there. So that is the conclusion of the sentry change. If you guys would like, you can actually go in and peek inside the guard room, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
More active back when this was still a military base, they'd actually be doing quite substantial to guard the fort. So they'd be stopping everyone who was coming up to visit the fort, and they'd find out who they were and what they were doing here. They seemed like a nice person with a good reason. They'd bring them in back here to this room, and they'd have to talk to the sergeant of the guards. And we'd find out who they were and what business they had in the fort. There were maybe merchants up here doing business with some of the men in barracks, things like that. They'd also be searching them, making sure they weren't bringing in any papers with pens and pencils that they could use to take diagrams of the fort's defenses to sell off to the French and American spies. Of course, none of you seem to be spies today, are you? I hope not. Right. Well, so what we do today is the sentries, they stand out there by the front gate for 1 hour, but then they get a 2-hour break back here in the guard room where it's nice and cool and they can talk to people and move around a bit. However, historically they'd actually be doing double that, so they'd be standing either by the front gate or by one of our 2 powder magazines for 2 hours, and then get a 4-hour break back here. And they actually would have had to rotate through like that for a full 24-hour shift from 10 a.m. until 10 a.m. the next day. So you can imagine it's not the most desirable position to have in the fort, especially if it's middle of winter with a blizzard blowing around and things like that. It's not the most fun. So sentry duty was often for the new recruits who hadn't learned very much yet and weren't really very useful for doing anything else around the fort yet either. Not that we do that today anymore, of course not. You may also notice over here we have the corporal of the guard, so these would be the people in charge of the sentries. So a guard detachment had a full detachment of 13 men, so there'd be 9 sentries. They have privates like me and some of the men inside there, and they'd be rotating through the 3 different sentry posts. And there'd be 3 of them on duty at a time, with the other 6 sitting back here relaxing. And there's 2 corporals of the guard, like Corporal Archibald here. They'd be the ones in charge of the sentries, making sure they were where they're supposed to be and not passing out or anything like that. And then there would be 1 sergeant in charge of the corporals and everyone else, keeping track of everyone coming in and out of the fort with a nice guest book to record all those records. And finally 1 drummer to play a few calls at different times of the day to let people know what time it was. Pocket watches were quite expensive at the time, and a private like me would be making a shilling and a penny for a day's work, so it would take quite a while to save up that much money. I also noticed that the sentries are dressed quite a bit differently than I am at the moment. However, we are still part of the same regiment. We're both members of the 78th Highlanders. So what I'm wearing is called drill order uniform. So this is sort of the casual wear, jeans and t-shirts of the Victorian Army. It's a bit lighter uniform. It's a bit more comfortable. I don't have all the fancy trim and big buttons to worry about. So this is for things like training. It's like the squad you'll see marching around. They'll be marching around a bit. So they're actually some of our newest recruits, so they're just learning some of the things. If you're interested in seeing some people getting yelled at quite a bit, you can find them. So this uniform sort of just for training purposes, doing general work around the fort. To get this one a bit dirty or ripped up, it's still fairly cheap and easy to replace. The sentries are wearing their dress uniform, that red doublet, much fancier than what I've got. With that bright red dye puffed up with fancy cuffs and collars, with large brass buttons which need to be shone and polished each and every morning. The whole process to get dressed up like that takes just about an hour. So that's actually what they'd wear for special things, things like standing sentry, going on parades, or marching into battle. They'd also be wearing that. So sentries do have all their rifle gear with them as well. That little pouch on the front that holds about 10 rounds of ammunition, as well as one on the back that holds about 30 more. Of course, the bayonet in the back as well, in case someone gets a little too close. These rifles do take a little bit of time to reload, not as much as the muskets, but still about 5 or 6 seconds. If someone's a little bit fast, you can pull out that bayonet, and suddenly your rifle is also a spear. It's quite useful. So, are there any other questions?